Okay, so just to check that we are all in the right room, this talk is about Wargaming Sydney becoming Riot Sydney. Yeah. We have been wargaming for 10 years, 7 in my case, and I assume that the majority of the audience today knows a bit of the history of the studio. Okay, everybody in the right talk, good. Welcome everybody. Thank you for being here today. Let's start with my introduction and why you should even listen to what I have to say. This is the moment in which I try to establish credibility as a presenter. And with my accent, it's difficult to be credible. Anyway, I was part of the studio leadership before the acquisition, and I'm now. So I have the privilege to observe what is going on multiple levels. Change management is a big part of my expertise. And although I was not wearing the change manager hat during the acquisition, often I look at things that way. Way of working in operations is currently my day-to-day. And this is still very much tied to the acquisition event. Riot is a fairly big organization, and navigating the multiple aspects of how integrate many teams takes time. For the next hour or so, we're going to have a chat. Through a number of hopefully interesting examples, we will go through a journey. And the journey might be not what you are expecting. Before jumping right into it, here we have some contextual numbers. I feel very, very lucky that this event is happening right now, because it gives me the opportunity to say that it is basically 1 year from the acquisition. And it goes without saying that it has been an incredible year, really, full of events, full of changes, and flown by. Another important aspect to notice is that we're still in a honeymoon phase. As you can see from our attrition number, incredibly low, and this means also that maybe we've done a good job and keeping ourselves together. And also, please take that into account when I give a couple of examples, that this could still be something that it's where we feel at the best, and we'll see if that continues. The majority of us have been together for quite some time, and we have grown our skills together. So as we can see, we skew heavily towards senior bunch. We are a reasonably large studio for Australian standards, 100+ devs. And our mission involves all Riot development aspects. We are currently working on all live games, from League of Legends to Valorant. And we're working on the tech underlying it, and we might or might not be working on other things. This presentation will not follow chronological events. Why is that? Well, this is not a recipe to apply to your next acquisition. I don't think that such recipe could exist. And even if it was the case, I'm certainly not the right person to present it. In addition, there are several stages that I cannot cover in this talk. As you can imagine, Riot takes security very seriously. So serious that there might be a bodyguard in the audience ready to jump on the stage to stop me if I start blabbing too much. That's the guy. Okay, cool. So if this presentation does not follow a chronological order, then what? Much better. We will follow a logical order. Change management following ProSci methodology, the ADKAR model. If you're more familiar with 8-quarter step, you would see a number of familiar kind of traits, starting with the order of the steps is crucial. In any change in change management has been researched quite a bit with a lot of data. If you do not address the first stage of change, which in this case is awareness, then you hinder your ability to have a successful change and step afterwards. Hopefully this is not destroying your ability to have a successful change, but it plays a big importance. So we're going to see how certain things can go bad if you're not building your foundation and growing up to the stages. So what are these stages? Let's explore them. Awareness. For a change to be successful, people involved need to know about it. Okay, that sounds really, really basics. But it's important, and as we're going to see, understanding, especially in an acquisition or any other big change, what is changing and how can you be aware of it, it's not that easy. So have that in mind, that being aware of what is changing is really important, and it's not always so evident. So leadership needs to put extra effort. Second stage, desire. Human being and motivations. What is in it for me? That's a question that either is all of our back of the mind or front of the mind. And especially in our industry, where we have so many creative people, so many people that really choose to be in this industry, there is always that idea of like, why I'm here, what I'm doing, and if things change, what is in it for me? Why should I still be as motivated as before or even more? And somebody, it has been proven that the best person to do it is your line manager, should be able to answer that question, directly or indirectly. Third, we have knowledge. Understanding how different parts fit together, having the knowledge required to change. This also seems quite trivial, but again, it requires thorough analysis from leadership to make sure that we share the knowledge of what is changing and what you should be knowing in order to be successful. Then we have ability, which is very different from having the ability to follow what one knows. Right? For example, League of Legends. Farm minions, scale faster, crush opponent in lane, bully everybody mid and late game, win. Easy. But somehow when you try it, even though you know this, maybe execution is not going to go according to plan. Similarly, we're going to see that the ability to put in place what one knows is not that easy. And lastly, reinforcement. Having an environment that is consistent with what is changing. In the case of an acquisition, if you stay in that company, you might think that like, okay, that's a given, pretty easy. Not so fast. There are a lot of nested changes, and it is important that they are coherent with one another. Please note, big changes, like an acquisition, bring with them a lot of nested changes. And that is where the real complexity is. Therefore, in our chat, examples jump freely from one change to another, and groups impacted by sub-changes are at times unclear. This is also because of the nature of the change itself. It is not always clear how people get really impacted by it. Are you familiar with Factorio? You get the idea. Fixed here, broken there, jump back. People are very complex. Please ask questions at the end of the presentation for clarifications. And actually, I'm really counting on questions at the end to make this a bit more of a conversation. Lastly, I promise we're almost there. Before looking at our examples, a recap of notable events is probably needed. We were Wargaming Sydney. Things were fine. And then the war in Ukraine happened. I'm sure that many of you would have your own personal stories and you would relate to the tragedy that it's a war. But I want to point out that in the case of Wargaming was really caught in the middle of this. Wargaming had thousands of employees spread across Belarus, Russia, Ukraine, and the human aspect of that tragedy really took a lot of the executive mind and effort. And so the idea was born that in Australia, far away, there was a bunch of people very talented, and maybe we could sell the talent and get some extra resources to help with what was going on in Europe. So that set in motion the start of our merger and acquisition process, which lasted months. This has been my first merger and acquisition, and even though I understand that something like that is not very quick, I didn't know how complex it is, how many phases it has. Just to give you an idea, only the last phase, which you know who's going to acquire you after that all the bidders have clarified and there is one, it still lasted 2 months for us. It's a long time when you're waiting to know, okay, did it really happen? Are we now Riot? It helped a lot the strong alignment of our DNA as a studio and Riot as a company. Because with each day passing, we were realizing that, like, yeah, we see it. It's a very good fit. It's happening. But still, again, going for 2 months has been quite a challenge. Okay, now we should be ready. First example, first stage, awareness. We have been very open with the studio on what was happening, with weekly updates, and after acquisition with Ask Me Anything type of town hall. This has been quite difficult to do. Start with the very first decision took by our ex-general manager to be that transparent. This could have been disastrous. Information could have leaked, and it could have jeopardized the whole operation. Lucky enough, as far as I know, nothing leaked. We're here today. So kudos on us on that decision. Another aspect of that decision to foster the awareness of what's going on that was difficult is that you don't always have, as a leader, answers, and that's understandable. But also more complicated than that is you might commit to next week we should have an answer, and then next week come, and it's too quick, and you still don't have the answer. And putting your face and saying people as things they are. It's like, yeah, no, it didn't happen. Or that person actually didn't come back to us. And try to be very transparent to build also what we want to be as a company to move forward. And all of this obviously created a lot of awareness around the change, around we are changing company. We're going to be different even though we stay together as a studio. The bit that was most surprising, at least to me, talking about awareness, is that, okay, becoming Riot, that's clear, really aware, really kept informed, but what about the details? Who's going to be my manager? Who's going to be my team? Which project I'm going to work on? Nested changes, remember? Tricky part of the nested changes is that each individual takes them in a personal way. Who's my manager versus who's your manager and my project? If you can think about the matrix of these changes, then you'll easily arrive to a unique type of change for each individual. And this is almost impossible to track as an awareness piece. What is changing, helping you as a leader or as your manager, what is changing for you? It requires a lot of conversations. And not everybody is catered in the same way. So please that into account. 100 people, 100 plus people with managers that are changing themselves. So imagine you have a manager that has all these questions for themselves that half they're answered, half they're not answered, and they need to help their own people to try to understand. And maybe their own people will change because we're changing structure and we're changing project. So that was a very complex moment. And a little bit surprising also to see how the very first stage of awareness, which should be easy, becomes very complex. Second stage, desire. Riot, the most player-focused company. This resonated a lot with a high number of Sydney rioters who got desire within that. However, new company, new ambitions. And this has been another big surprise. Coming from years of working together, we have developed policies and practices. One thing, for example, is over-communicating. We used to work with a lot of Russian-speaking people, and now we're changing. The headquarters are now in LA, so lots of English first language speakers. So a number of people have thought like, okay, finally this burden on us to double communicate, triple communicate can go. And actually now communication doesn't work like that. It's always very, very important to double down on it. And it's something that was a surprise to me because we were doing it well. Why abandon it? Because again, this is also part of a personal trajectory and new company, new ambitions, maybe I can let go of something. Another thing is that I'm sure many of you who can share this, not everybody is a fan of process. I am, personally, but a number of people are not. And therefore, the occasion of this is a new company, and maybe it's the time to kill that process that we actually don't know if it is useful or not at this stage. And since we weren't really coherent in what to abandon, what not to abandon, it has been difficult to manage. And it was surprising to see that this type of actions came from different places that, frankly, I wasn't expecting. After many years of working with somebody, you would expect what they like, what they don't like, and what are the actual ambitions. But when you join a new company like this one, it's also maybe a new project that you're really, really passionate about, way more than what you were working before. And therefore, you let that aspect taking over something that before you were doing in a very balanced way. So this is something that we need to take it always into account. Moving on, knowledge. Playing games together to discover Riot culture has been really, really important for us. We played a lot. And not to brag, but after hundreds of hours that I have personally devoted to League of Legends, I can say that I'm part of the 3%. Okay, I'm Iron 3, which is the bottom 3%. Anyway, the point is that we all put in a lot of effort to understand our games. In our industry, it's easy. Like, you need to know your product. That's nice, let's play some game. And we had the opportunity in those 2 months to play a lot, to really understand what shifted. Before we were developing games, now we develop different games. So having a feeling for our core audience, and also having a feeling for our products and what is the most important part of them. So that part of the knowledge was nice to acquire. Another part that was nice and absolutely fundamental for us was learning new values. The importance of values at Riot is massive. It's really the first company that I'm joining in which at different levels, in different meetings, often there are reference to our values and how the decision that we're about to make is going to impact it, and vice versa. Our first and most important value is player experience first. And that's playing, that's easy, no discovery under it. It's really true, player experience first. Our second value is dare to dream. Each company has an appetite for risk and what is deemed risky or not risky. And for us, it was really, really important to understand this and try to learn and have the knowledge on what is considered to be a risk at Riot and what are our ambitions. And this was nice for us to have a value that can focus. The third value is thrive together. I think that for us, this was an easy one, having coming from this very difficult moment in which all of a sudden you learn that your company is up for sale, the studio that you've worked on for many, many months or years. And now we fit together as a group, and I think that we really learned that we had to thrive together. We needed to stick together and try to find a new home. So for us, noticing that in this new home, there is a value dedicated to it. It felt good, and I think it felt also pretty natural. Fourth, we have execute with excellence. Okay, values needs to be also aspirational. And I believe that many of you can share with us that in our industry, executing with excellence, not so easy at times. And in our case as well, knowing that there is that value and there is that importance in Riot, it's a really important piece of the knowledge, because making it a value gives it a different gravitas. And lastly, stay hungry and stay humble. This is really something that has surprised me within Riot. In our industry, typically we associate personal success with the success of our products, and Riot products are pretty successful. So finding people that have such amazing experience under their belt and still being totally willing to talk with you, understand what's your point of view, and integrate in their job what you're doing has been really, really amazing. And it shows that there is a value underpinning all of that. Lastly, for the stage knowledge, another surprise for us. Working with the headquarters to learn together differences in laws, policies. Obviously, everybody, I imagine, in this room know that US is different compared to Australia when it comes to hiring, firing, and in general, HR policies. Something that should have been a walk in the park is that we have a very nice policy, which is open paid time off, AKA unlimited leave. Typically, this is something that employees like quite a bit. And we had to learn that actually implementing a policy like that is not that easy when there are different laws of different countries involved. I hope that this is relevant, because if another big acquisition were to happen, I believe that there is a high chance that a non-Australian entity would buy an Australian entity. And as many of you would know, in Australia, employees are a little bit more protected, and your employer need to track the days that you take of leave, not because of just wanting to control, but because if it happens that the employee chooses to leave, then the employer needs to pay the accrued benefits, if they have any. In the US, it's slightly different. So when we look at implementing that, we open a Pandora box. What constitutes annual leave, and why should we track it? As I said, because of a law. But when our employee checked, and like, okay, in US, they don't need to track it as well, and they don't need all this definition of what is which. It creates some frictions for us, because we needed to explain again why nested changes, certain things are changing, and we need to readapt in a regional section. And all of these unknowns popped up when you discover them and you acquire the knowledge of actually what those things are. Moving on to ability. Role expectations based on our headquarter ecosystem needs rethinking when looking at regional offices. We have producers, product managers. How about project managers? And engineer manager is also tech lead or not? All of these are questions that we needed to deal with. And in the case of talking about the ability of performing one's job, is also understanding how a little difference might make you a good producer or a bad producer, depending on the definition of producer. So we need to learn what is the definition first of being a producer in Riot. And maybe we discover that it changes 90%, which it helps. We know how to do 90%. But then we needed really to pay attention on that 10%, not to step on each other's toes. And like, for example, there are some roles that in a studio that has 100 people, maybe we cannot have. So, for instance, a product manager, as it is organized in Riot, is a slightly higher level and oversees kind of big insights. And we need to know how to leverage that. For some of our producers, this was a little bit of a nuanced, and it is important to try to understand how to leverage that. And similarly goes with engineering manager and who can be a tech lead and what are the reasons why you should be a tech lead and not a manager and vice versa. All in all, I think that we tackled this very well because there was a lot of a focus. Everybody was really vested in understanding how to perform at best in their role. And when noticing a difference and when noticing that actually there is an uncomfort stage now because I thought that I'm really good, but now in this different definition, I need more assistance, we were really able to give the right amount of effort from all the levels to make sure that this was properly addressed. Something that maybe was not properly addressed, and we were quite shocked, is that Riot attracts a lot of attention. Okay, we understood that, and that's fine. What has to change with it? Well, for example, if I find myself previously in an airport, waiting to go and visit the workers, I might want to work on my laptop, not caring too much who can spy on my laptop. Well, things have changed a little bit. And the story that I'm going to present is that we were in our studio, so no public place. We are working in our studio, which is at the second floor of a building. And in an adjacent building, there were work in progress. And we noticed a builder taking picture of it. Maybe they recognize some League of Legends things, some things that they're really passionate about it. And we were quite shocked because in 10 years prior, it has never happened. And now we joined, and after a couple of months, we have already that kind of attention. So now it starts creating this mind shift around the ability of how to deal with it and how to handle ourselves in public. You think that you know how to do it, but this touches also things like, for example, you're sharing a Uber ride to go to an office, you're with a colleague, and how much can you talk about what you're going to do and developing, and which keywords maybe you have to leave out. So all of these things requires attention, but it's such a delicate topic that you go about with your life, you don't even think about it. And yeah, it got me by surprise. So we need to always keep attention to the ability to do something that now we know, but still can catch us. And lastly, we have reinforcement. On this, I must say that Riot does an incredible job. Forget about the acquisition. In general, if you join Riot, there is an onboarding week called DNUB, where you get bombarded with culture and values. And for us, it's been fantastic. We doubled down. We got 2 weeks of it. And it was really, really important because, again, after the fatigue of coming from these months and months of we're going to get acquired by whom, we don't know, and then we know it's Riot, and still 2 months. Now, finally we are, and there is a stage in which, like, okay, whatever you know, keep it aside. Now we're telling you what is the real thing, and dedicated 2 weeks for that. So that was a real clear reinforcement moment in which, like, yes, you are a group, you move together, you are now in a new home, and this is how the things change and why they change, and this has been really, really fantastic for us. Lastly, on reinforcement, we have a strong push towards empowering Rioters to make appropriate entrepreneurial choices. An example of this is that we have workplace experiences versus building manager, and that requires people to really be open and try to work with somebody that their entire job is make sure that we are comfortable, that we can do our best job in our environment, in our office. And that's fantastic, but also requires a little bit of that understanding that I need to share information. I need to say what I like, what I don't like, how I use certain spaces. And another bit that has been a little bit surprising for us is how time management change if you're required to be more entrepreneurial. We have been doing CodeDev for a long time, also before getting acquired. And time management is at the heart of it, like when to make a call, when make it sense. but with a push towards being more entrepreneurial, also a little bit US-centric, then it came really the idea of what are you doing day by day? Does that have the highest possible value? And if not, speak up. Make sure that we can do something about it. And this has been a very nice touch on reinforcement that we are the same group, but with slightly different mindset. Ultimately, since we're talking about an acquisition, the fact that we're still Riot is the biggest environmental reinforcement for this change to stick. The nested changes for which each individual might have a different take on is where leadership has to keep working to make sure that things run smoothly. We have now reached the conclusion of the presentation, and we can start the more interactive part with questions. However, I'm aware that I might have been quite generic on a number of passages and a number of details. Feel free to ask all the details that you want. Just allow me to ask for my friend Yasho if it is something that I feel that it's a little bit too much detail and I cannot risk the bodyguard jump and stopping me. So thank you very much for your attention. Ask away.
You pick, I'll give them mine.
Oh, okay, sure.
With Desire, can you give some other examples of like what that is and why it's important? I feel like I understood the others, but I think Desire intuitively I get it, but would like some more concrete examples.
Okay, so I'll try to interpret your question in a more generic way, and then we can go. So each individual being is doing what it's doing because they have intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. So in a change, it's really important that something that is super important for you is not impacted by the change. That's rare. Typically, it is impacted. And especially in an acquisition, basically everything is impacted. By chance, I believe we are still using Slack, and we were using it before. Okay, but everything else, I think, has changed, which means that you need to keep in check, first of all, yourself, to try and understand how an impact touches on your desire, your career desires, your ambition to work on a project versus another project. So really being aware of what makes you tick, it's something that, it's a tricky beast. Because if before you were working on a project that, it's fine, it's a game, it's serving millions of people, but I don't play it, and now you work maybe on your favorite game, you will notice that your desire in having a say on something that before you knew that you shouldn't have, now you still want to give that. If you're not a designer, you're doing engineering, absolutely. Give your input to the design manager of whomever is creating whatever that you're not even working on. But if you want to have more of a say, because no, but that's really important, it's the game that I like, people need to take that into account. And it's a good idea for you to transition to a project that you feel that passionate. Are you able to be that type of professional that can separate what you're working on versus your passion or not? Does that answer your question?
Yep. I guess a follow-up question from that. If the decision needs to be made that you need to be acquired, like how do you consult with the team to make sure that, like, if people's desires aren't being met, if people aren't happy about things, like, are you consulting with them? Are you making concessions? Like, what's the process of actually managing a team and trying to align what would be a very disparate arrangement of desires from a lot of different people in order to make it work for them?
So you're talking about here at the maximum level at the acquisition itself, the desire.
More from the team.
Yeah, from the team. Do they have a say who can acquire us and who shouldn't?
More in the change management of like the changes happening. Like how do you, I guess, dig into like make sure that the team is going to be on board for the change?
Yeah. So this is a very complex question, and I'll try to.
All good. You don't have to answer it if
No,
it's too complex.
I think I can. I try to do a couple of phases. So first of all, in our case, it was the very first job of leadership is like, hey, let's have really a good internal talk and try to understand, do you like this group of people? Because that's what we have. we're not bringing with us an IP. Do you want to stick with us? And apparently they did. We wanted, because 98% is still here. So that was kind of smooth. And everybody must have had their own motivations. Then there was the moment in which there are multiple companies try to have a say in, maybe we can utilize this talented group of people to do X, Y, or Z. And at that point, it was too confusing, and we didn't have an opportunity to really share with people and engage the idea. But then, at a later stage, when it was a little bit clearer, then we did have a little bit more conversation around, like, hey, how do we envision? And we got very, very lucky, because in an acquisition like this, we could have been acquired by a company that, like, okay, that's cool, you were doing game. How about now you do something else, something aviation, something that we try you to sell on. And we find ourselves with companies that all wanted us to keep going and making games, and the game that really interests us. Does that answer your question?
Thanks.
My question was, how did you find and manage the sort of shift in productivity and well-being of the staff during the change, considering, Wargaming and Riot quite different?
Right, absolutely. Thank you very much for the question. It's, again, a very complex question. I need to answer it in phases. The first phase is, we're still wargaming, this news hit us, and we need to wrap up our work. So at that stage, we got really, really blessed, a bunch of really professional people that, beyond knowing what we're going to do, we're going to make sure that what we worked on, some of us for years, is properly handed over. And that I really need to thank our teams, how they handle that. Then there is the phase in which, like, okay, we are kind of done with handing it over, now what? And we had very enlightened executives that decided, like, yeah, now it's the moment to explore, getting some game session together and try to understand. And luckily enough, that phase didn't last too much then. And now we know, if everything goes well, it's going to be Riot. And then super motivating, because Riot is a very coveted company, therefore understanding what the company is and try to spend months and try to go, like, how do you fit? Watch videos of people talking at GDC, GCAP, everything. So that was pretty easy. And then there is the last phase in which, like, okay, now you're Riot, you were working before as a group, now clearly you can deliver the day after. Luckily enough, our manager, our exec in Riot are really savvy people, and they understood that, like, it's worthless to put pressure on a group like that. Like, yeah, next sprint, clearly you have something to give us. We got months for the ramp up, really soaking in what's different, and also taking into account that we have massive live games. Therefore, the risk is not worth it. Like, yeah, no, take a couple of months more, and let's make sure that you don't go and wipe out something that is super important, your first bug fix.
Thank you.
Thanks for the talk. Did you have a lot of change management experience in the past, or did you kind of learn this to deal with the acquisition? Okay,
all tricky questions here, but good, because I can answer this. I am a certified change manager, if that means anything, since 2016. But I would say that, especially in our industry, with all the amount of change that goes on, I never met a change manager, actually, somebody with that title doing that job. So I wouldn't say that we were particularly heavy on change managers and knowing how to do stuff. We learned a lot through this acquisition, and certain things we were able to handle from a pure change management lens, and other things were too big. Like, I did a little bit of an analysis when we were doing that, and when it changed at that stage, with so many people involved, with so many changes, it is recommended by several kind of industry bodies that, okay, you should have a group of change managers. One in the acquiring, one in the acquisition. You should have at least 2 or 3 working together. Having none has been challenging, and all of us lended a hand in trying to understand, okay, what do we have in the end, change management is a project management applied to a particular change. And so we had the luck of having a number of people very skilled at project management, and it went well. So, yeah.
Interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I guess, firstly, were there any drastic changes, or are there ongoing changes to production processes or kind of operating processes around the business that you can kind of talk to, and how you manage that? And then secondarily, how do you make sure that you promote a positive local culture for your studio, but also maintain collegiate relationships between, you know, Australia and the international offices?
Okay, I'll try to be as vague as I can so that I avoid the jump. I'll start answering maybe with the last part of the question, which is we are putting a lot of effort in feeling part of the same group. Riot has a number of games, and internally, obviously, we form pillars around the games. And we try to visit each other quite a bit, maybe even 4 times a year, 2 times coming, 2 times going. That always helps. We have a very open culture, so try to understand what's going on, what is not going on. And after 12 months, we still discover that, like, oh, no one has added us to that particular channel, or we're not. So typically, no drama, we get added into the channel, and we're building together this type of knowledge and understanding. Jumping on operations and these type of things, yeah, a lot has changed. Personally, oversee the operations of Valorant in Sydney, and that has been easy kind of for me, because before I was overseeing a similarly sized group of people doing a co-development in Europe. So that a number of things we were able to bring with us as making sure who talks with whom and who should make the calls. Again, as I said in the talk, our DNA as a studio and Riot culture and values really align really, really well. So the idea of producers should talk with producers, and that's how you get a change in a feature. That's what we learned before and what's still true. So in a sense, we got a little bit lucky as well. Thanks.
This one you may not be able to go into as much detail on, but I was wondering if there are any things about, you know, your process or culture that you really actually, as part of the acquisition, had to push back on. Like, you know, they want to change things, but you felt strongly, or you and, you know, the leadership team felt strongly that they should think some things should stay the same way. Maybe you can't go to examples, but, you know, how did you navigate that as well? Like,
So to better understand your question is about the headquarters have an idea or a certain practice that they go like, you really need to adopt, and you would like to hear an example of something that we have been able to push against successfully.
yeah, if you can.
Yeah, let me think about it. Well, Riot doesn't really work on terms of like, well, we have this, you must adopt it. It has been more around, well, this is really important for us, and please have a look. Tell us if you cannot adopt it. And maybe there is something that I can talk about that is not too difficult, is the majority of us would know that Riot had a little bit of a history and something happened. And after that moment, they established like, okay, now relationship within the company is something that is a little bit dangerous, so please don't. And if you do, let's make sure that people are aware and there are rules around it. Now, thanks to the fact that we got acquired, we had a different culture, and we have a couple of people that are married. And we have been able to highlight that, and the headquarters acknowledge and like, okay, this is an exception for us. Typically, we do not allow that to work in close proximity, but we have been able, I wouldn't call it a push against, but more to highlight. And leaders in our regional group had to put, obviously, their name around like, yep, We promise nothing bad is going to happen. We have been working 7 years with these particular individuals, and we have a lot of faith that everything's going to be well. So that's one example that we have been able to surface and reason. Other examples, there aren't many, and the one that there are probably are too detailed. Done. Well, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.